Hey, Mike here with Canadian musician, and on the line with me is Gordie Johnson, Canadian icon, best known for Big Sugar, and who reunited 2 or 3 years ago and is back together with a new album, but he's also in Wide Mouth Mason and the Texas-based band Grady. But before we get into it, how you doing, Gordie? Thanks a lot for joining me.
I'm good. I'm also in Sit Down Servant, which is another band that actually taken up a lot of my time these days.
Oh, really? Okay, I want to get into that. And, well, first off, we'll start with the new Big Sugar album called Yardstyle. It's more an acoustic-based album, at least more so than what Big Sugar fans will be, I guess, overly familiar with.
It's strictly an acoustic record. There's no electric instruments on the record. We didn't even use headphones in the studio to record. We set up in a circle on the floor in the studio. There's about a dozen of us. There's no overdubs, nothing like that. You know, it was strictly getting a snapshot of an event in a studio with us and all our friends.
That's cool. That approach, I didn't realize it was that stripped down. No overdubs, no, not even headphones. Really, just sounds like pretty much like kind of like recording a jam session almost.
Kind of, or like a kitchen party. Everybody's sitting around and everyone's singing. You know, we did a lot of songs that are older repertoire done in this style, but also some new material, and you know, we were very pleased to have, you know, friends like Willie Williams, who's a reggae legend, sitting in with us and singing along and playing along on the whole record. So we did a couple of his songs as well that are on the record, and we have a few additional tracks of his material that we recorded with that band that we'll release at some later date. But you know, it just, that situation lent itself to so many possibilities, and we even recorded, Big Sugar even recorded a song that was released on a Grady record a few years ago, just because in that format it was so perfect. It sounded so good, and everyone kind of knew it. So there's a lot of interesting twists and turns to it.
And that's cool. And the song selection, because it's so diverse, new material, reworkings of Big Sugar, you mentioned Grady, Willie Williams. Did you guys have a set list of or a track list of what you wanted to record, or was it really that organic? You kind of made it up as you went along?
No, we kind of had a wish list of songs that we all thought would sound great in that context. Some of them didn't translate, but you found out pretty quickly. We started playing a song, and if it required too much discussion or thought, that just wasn't in keeping with the whole vibe. There were other songs, like, for example, that Grady song, West Coast Hobo in a Boxcar. We just started playing it, and Mr. Chill was like, "Oh, hey, man, I can make a train noise on the harmonica," and before I knew it, different people were playing drums,
Yeah.
Everyone just, started finding their vocal parts to sing along, and like I said, it just blossomed right in front of us. So we had at it.
What was going back to the first, I guess, kernel of the idea of this album? Essentially, why approach it this way? What was the motivation for doing this album in this way?
Well, all of the songs in the Big Sugar repertoire, all of them, absolutely every last one of them, for years and years, they always originate on an acoustic instrument anyway. If I'm sitting in a dressing room or on a tour bus or at home songwriting with any of my various songwriting partners or fellows in the band, we're playing acoustic instruments, and some hand drums or a banjo and some harmonicas. So they all start that way anyway, just no one gets to hear them that way, except us. We take them to electricity as part of the process, because I feel like it's a better song if it works without the double neck guitar and the big I don't walk, or I hate to dispel any myths, but I don't walk around the house with a double neck on my shoulder, kind of like rocking out. Oh, dude, it must be awesome you have so many guitars. Yeah, I walk around the house with a banjo, like. So just to set the record straight there. But I think it makes for a better song, without all of the sparkle and the special effects. If the song works and we remember it and we find it compelling, then it translates beautifully to electricity. So that's kind of our natural state. Anyway, we found on the last tour across Canada that we did last year that when they would send us to a radio station to do an interview or to a TV show in the morning to promote a show, it just didn't make sense to take all of our electric instruments and all of our gear. Big Sugar's kind of unwieldy that way. We descend upon a TV station, all the technical people start to kind of faint when they see the stuff rolling. They're doing a cooking segment, and then Big Sugar, what? It wasn't really happening. And I usually go do those things by myself or just with Mr. Chill, just the two of us will go. But the last tour, everybody was, it really felt like a family reunion for us, and everybody was, we'd all eat breakfast together. We'd all go do everything together. And that's, 10 guys running around day of show. And so when a radio station would pull up in the van and say, hey, man, we take you guys for your interview, everybody would go. We'd grab a djembe and some bongos and some shakers, and I'd grab a banjo and an acoustic guitar and some harmonica. We just all showed up with instruments, whatever we could carry in our hands. And we'd go to the radio station and kind of just take over. We'd play 3-4 songs, play for half an hour, 45 minutes on air, and the radio folks loved it, fans heard it, loved it, we loved it, and just thought to ourselves, imagine if that was the whole tour. Imagine if that was it. You show up with some bongos and a harmonica, and that was it. Yeah, man. We could do that.
It does sound fantastic.
Yeah, right? That is where the idea was born out of gee, how much fun was that? Usually we hate doing those things, and now we're all scrambling to, get out of bed in the morning and get ready to go to the radio station because it was so much fun. Like, well, cool, man. So I think that's a good barometer for if you're doing the right thing in your career anyway. Like, how much fun is this? That as opposed to, well, I wonder if we need something that's more radio friendly, or if the songs aren't sure, maybe we need to write some hits, like, oh God, I'm too, I've been through too much to focus on those sorts of things. Big Sugar has never been ideally suited to any of those formats, and in spite of that, we've managed to survive and have a great deal of success, and we're proud of it, and I don't see any reason to change now. I think if we just follow our muse, then our fans will keep taking it.
Yeah, rightfully so. And you mentioned with reggae legend Willie Williams is on the record. You guys do a few of his songs, and it seems like he's kind of become an unofficial member of Big Sugar in a way. Where?
I love members, actually. There are a lot of folks. We have a lot of unofficial members. There's a lot of Big Sugar can be 5. It's never smaller than 5 people, but it can be as many as 12 on a given night, depending who's around. The guys from Wide Mouth Mason fold neatly into Big Sugar whenever we're together. Meredith Shaw is an artist that I've worked with a lot. That's a songwriter and also worked on her records, and if she's in the same building, she shows up. I've got the McDonald brothers from the Trues showed up at the session, so of course they're on the record, and reggae musicians we've played with for decades in Toronto. Once people knew this was going on, there are a few of the songs where someone who's not sitting down at the beginning of the song walked into the studio, grabbed a pair of maracas, and ends up on the end of the song.
And well, actually, no. I'm gonna follow along those lines. I'll get back to Willie Williams in a second. But with that, you're kind of describing it. Big Sugar is almost a collective, an ever-changing collective. How would you define it then? You're the constant. Is it you and whoever you're playing with, or like how do you essentially what in your mind is Big Sugar then? It's
become a wonderful community of like-minded people. You know, because everybody I've worked with, and most of this comes from, you know, we've always taken bands on tour with us that we admire and think need a leg up. You know, we've always been very careful to curate our baby bands as we go. You know, where I've been given a hand to young bands for a long time, from Nickelback and 3 Days Grace to the Trues and the Respectables and Meredith Shaw. You know, all of these bands I've worked with over the years. I've either worked with them in the studio or in some capacity. So we've always been real generous with our stage. You know, like, hey, our stage is your stage. Come on up, man. It's better for everybody that way. You know, because I was treated that way by bigger bands that gave us chances over the years. You know, that's the way they treated us. So I feel like that was a worthy tradition to pass on. You know, I mean, Big Sugar worked with the Rolling Stones, and there had never been as generous a band as them in terms of, oh, you're the opening act? Come and eat our food, drink our drink, do everything we do. You can have the whole stage, the Jumbotron. Do you want us to get rid of the rug? You can keep the rug or we'll move it. Do you want a riser or not a riser? Like, what?
Really?
Absolutely no limits. Absolutely no limits on what you're there to put on your show, and they treat you like you're the headliner. It's the Rolling Stones. They could be the biggest jerks in the world, but they're not.
It's funny. There's a lot of very big bands that if you had said that about it, wouldn't surprise me. But I never got that impression that the Rolling Stones would be that way.
And I've heard that from, it wasn't just us. I mean, I've heard that from a lot of people who've worked with them, that their crew, their entire organization, they obviously, if you're good enough to play with us, you deserve this full, you know, all the privileges. It's wonderful. I mean, and everyone does put on a better show for it. So I thought, well, they're doing that because obviously that's the way it's supposed to be done. So we try to carry that on, and it's wonderful because now all of these bands over the years, all the people that we've worked with, they've become our family. You know.
Interesting. And getting back to Willie Williams, what I really just wanted is essentially how. I know you guys go back at least a few years, maybe more. Where did that relationship come from? How did he end up becoming so intertwined with Big Sugar?
Well, Gary, our bass player, Gary Lowe, he and Willie grew up in Kingston, Jamaica together.
Oh, really?
The way they tell it, they've known each other from short pants time. You know, little boys, little bald head boys in school with short pants, you know, carrying their books. That they know each other from then, and came to Canada around the same time. They immigrated from Jamaica to Canada about the same time in the mid-'70s. And so Gary's known and worked with Willie all along. So he, you know, he's Gary's family, he's our family. So a lot of the reggae influence in Big Sugar comes from people like that, Jackie Matu and Willie Williams and Big Youth and people like that, you know, that all my guys have worked with over the years. That becomes part of our DNA. Yeah.
Just that reggae influence, something I really want to know about is, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe you grew up in Manitoba and Alberta, have spent a bunch of time in Texas, and I've seen you in past interviews mention your early influences as a lot of the early blues greats and classic rock greats. But
yeah, see, that was from my time. I spent most of my growing up in the Detroit area.
Okay.
So I heard well, my first exposure to music was there. I mean, believe me, I didn't hear any music on the farm. Yeah. You know, it was a different soundtrack to my life. But I carried that with me everywhere I went. I mean, even my first exposure to reggae music was in Detroit.
Okay.
There would be some underground radio that played reggae music late on a Saturday night. And I went and saw the Steel Pulse and the Black Uhuru and Gregory Isaacs and any band that came through. I went and saw them in Detroit back in the day in the early 80s. When I went to Toronto to continue to pursue music professionally, it was sort of a strange new world for me. I'd never heard of the Juno Awards. I'd never heard of any of the bands that they were talking about when I got to Toronto. I was like, it's just a few hours down the highway, but man, I had no idea what y'all are talking about. It was probably the first time I found out Rush was Canadian. You know, I've been listening to Rush since I was a little kid, and got to Toronto and went, they're from here? I thought they were from Detroit. I don't know. You know, it was just a strange new world. And the only thing I could really gravitate to when I first got there was I had no idea there was such an enormous West Indian community, and it was such a cultural center for expatriate West Indians, especially Jamaicans. In Toronto, I found myself playing on every caravana, just working to death, playing, 6 shows a day or caravana or whatever. And the reggae clubs, all in close proximity. We would do jazz gigs, but we would do, in the same club on another night, we would do a reggae gig or a calypso or, anything like that. We'd go to after-hours dance hall sessions and just DJ culture and all that stuff. Just, in my neighborhood, I couldn't go to sleep at night or wake up in the morning for hearing the sound of reggae music booming out of every vegetable stand and record store and clothing store,
Yeah. Even then, sounds like you would have pursued reggae music, the music itself, the community it's coming from. It's not normal or it wouldn't be typical for, essentially a white kid from the prairies or even, a white Canadian kid in Detroit to really attach himself to reggae music. Like, what was it about reggae that connected with you?
It wasn't just the music, though. I mean, I was eating the food, I was hearing the language, and living in that community. I mean, I had a place in Kensington Market, or I was up at, Oakwood and Eglinton, and those neighborhoods were, Toronto being the multicultural place that it is. For a while I lived in an Italian neighborhood, but spent a lot of time living in a Jamaican neighborhood. Two of the more vibrant Jamaican neighborhoods in the GTA. So as I said, man, you hear the language, you eat the food, you interact with those people on a daily basis.
Yeah.
It just becomes the new normal. I wasn't always a reggae musician, but the people I admired were reggae musicians. I did jazz gigs with reggae musicians. I did blues gigs with reggae musicians because we're all just musicians, really. I didn't... And anyway, it's more in the aftermath when you dissect it and start putting labels on stuff that you can start talking about that. Because, at the time, I didn't give it a second thought. It wasn't like, wow, this is weird. Look I'm reggae now. It was just, hey man, we're all struggling. We're musicians trying to survive, and this is what's up. So you learn to play that music, and you just get in there. You get your clothes dirty. You get in there, and you learn to play for the older guys, teach the younger guys, and you see the crowd's reaction when you're doing it right, and that just becomes part of who you are as a musician.
Interesting, man. And would the same go, because all your projects are pretty different. Obviously, Wide Mouth Mason was already a place when you joined, but Grady is very much your band, and Sit Down Servants, and they're all quite different. I would guess all different aspects of your musical personality. Essentially, what determines what you do, what projects you join or start, and how they sound compared to each other?
There's not much plotting and scheming that goes into it. You get with a couple of like-minded individuals and start making music, and it becomes what it is.
Yeah.
The product of its environment as well. I mean, in Austin, Texas, when I first got here, a dozen years ago, punk metal stuff was blasting out of every club, and all my friends were in bands like that, and that just became part of the community that we were in, and our music got quite a bit edgier and louder and harder and trashier, and next thing you know, it's Grady. You know what I mean? And nobody blinked here. I mean, everyone thought, yeah, it fits right in here. Of course, you'd bring Grady up to Canada and go on tour, and people go, what? What? You look like, you know, the funniest was going to Norway and parts of Scandinavia on tour, a bunch of guys in jean jackets and cowboy hats. We looked like we're on the rodeo circuit. And then start playing that music, and people just go, you know, what is this? So it's a product of its environment. Sit-down servant, the same thing. You know, there's a great jazz scene here in Austin, and people, you know, not even just in jazz, but in general, push the limits of creativity all the time. You know, the more it enables you to, people are so accepting of music in all its forms here that it enables you to just pursue your creativity to the weirdest degree that you could imagine. And Sit Down Servant is kind of like a jazz organ duo, like Jimmy Smith or Jimmy McGriff or one of those, you know, guys like that, Jack McDuff. But I'm playing steel guitar and bass pedals instead of Hammond organ with bass pedals. So if someone had said, hey, we need you to put together a band where you're playing, you know, jazz repertoire by and large, but you're going to play it on steel guitar with bass pedals and drums, and you're going to do a bunch of it in dub. How's that sound? Is that okay? Is that cool? You're like, no. I wouldn't have written that down on paper and then gone and pursued it. It's just evolved into that, you know?
Yeah. What's your do you have a musical education background, or is everything self-taught? Or essentially, how did you evolve to the musician that you are?
You know, I couldn't call it self-taught because I have had, you know, I've learned from every musician I've played with, and I continue to absorb what's around me. So to say self-taught would be insincere, but I have to say I've learned through influence and proximity as opposed to study. I mean, I took music in high school, so I had a basis in theory just from high school band, you know. But beyond that, everything was just out of a hunger for knowledge. So, you know, even as a producer, you know, when I started out, I was a session musician and had to learn to adapt to whatever style was going. I was a guy for hire. So if it was synth pop, I had to be like programming a drum machine. If it was a jazz vocalist, I'd have to work out keyboard voicings on the guitar for some jazz standards or whatever was called for, you know. And that, I haven't forgotten anything, you know. That's the thing. It's all, you know, it all accumulates, and I make use of it on a regular basis, so I haven't forgotten very much.
How did the producing aspect of you, because you've been behind the console for a number of big artists, Taj Mahal, Warren Haynes in Canada with the Trews, Government Mule, Joel Plaskett, tons of people. Was that kind of similar to your bands? Was that something that would just sort of naturally fell into place, or did you want to pursue that aspect of music, being behind the board?
You know, I don't. It's funny, again, it's more in hindsight when I look at it. I guess I never really differentiated between a musical instrument and a recording studio. To me, is just one giant instrument for creative expression. You know, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I slept in a recording studio. I was the kid making the coffee and wrapping the cables. And I was just around it, and it's where I felt comfortable, and I watched people use that as a tool to create. You know, it was another tool for creative expression, albeit a very intricate one that involves some psychology, your ability to deal with diverse groups of people, and the flow of electrons. You know, all I'm doing is pushing buttons, just like on a piano. I'm creating a musical sound by pushing a button, essentially.
Interesting.
I looked at the recording studio the same way as, all right, if I can channel the flow of electrons in this manner, it evokes a response from the listener. I'm like, okay, when you look at it that way, everything is possible.
Yeah.
It's just acquiring the knowledge of what all those buttons do. But the goal remains the same. If I pick up a guitar or if I sit behind a mixing desk, the goal is the same.
Being behind the board, being producer, rather than in on the sessions as a member of the band, session guy, whatever it is, does that give you a different perspective that informs what you do as a musician and vice versa? Does your perspective as a musician inform what you're doing as a producer?
Oh, it's all the same to me. It's all the same stuff. I mean, and when I'm on a session as producer or if I'm mixing, because sometimes I'll just mix, so someone will send me audio to mix. I mean, Joe Plaskett has sent me a couple of records to mix, and John Angus MacDonald, Warren Haynes, all the people I've worked with as a producer also send me stuff to mix. And to me, it's the same. It's my instrument, So I have to make the speakers do a thing, Whether I could be playing the guitar or pushing the buttons, and so it's all cross-pollinating. I come away from a session a different musician. If that makes sense, and I come away from a gig a better producer.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because it's not really a different hat. It's the same kind of hat, just maybe a different color hat. I'm going to wear the black cowboy hat or the white cowboy hat. I'm not sure which one's which.
Speaking of cowboy hats, I noticed that when you were playing with Grady, like you guys would do, don the cowboy hats, get into, as you call it, the cowboy metal thing. I think you changed your name, went by the name Grady Johnson when you were with that band. And you take on the...
Oh, well, that is a nickname that I got on a Big Sugar tour years before Grady. So, yeah, I just I had to carry that around with me for a while.
And what I'm getting at, when you're with Big Sugar, you kind of have that reggae vibe. As an artist, you feel you have to kind of get in that mindset, get in that persona, or are you essentially the same person for each project?
As you put on that dough, like when I'm home in Texas, I mean, I live out in the country, I live on a piece of land, so, I put on my farm boots and my shit kicker jeans, and, I look like a bit of a redneck, or a lot of a redneck, if you prefer. I worked on a farm for years. It's in my blood, I've lived rurally for a long time, so, it's not a big stretch. Yeah. Well, I'm with Big Sugar, and I'm with all my Rasta Breds, and, we're cruising down the road on a tour bus doing some Rasta business every day, all day, and walk on stage that music. I got to wear some shoes with some bounce in them, Whereas, I don't dance on a Grady stage. I just need to be able to plant my boots on terra firma and rock. It's a different. It's a little different posture. I need clothes that fit differently to be able to execute it.
Nice, man. And just a couple quick things before we wrap up here. First, just it's been a few years now, but I haven't spoken to you. Well, this is my first time speaking to you, but with Big Sugar back together, is there how's the Big Sugar camp? Does it feel any different than it did pre 2003, or is it the same old gang sort of thing?
Oh, I think it's a lot better, actually. There's definitely the first show that we got back together, it really was like a family reunion, like weekend picnic. You're all sitting around a fire with a beer, just reminiscing, and not that it becomes all about reminiscing. It's just these are people that really communicate well together on stage, and it's just a certain thing that happens. I mean, we'll go 6 months without talking to one another, seeing one another. All of a sudden we'll have a show where we've all got to fly to from different places.
Yeah.
Once we get to the hotel lobby for lobby call for going to the venue, it's on. Like, everyone's laughing at the same jokes. The music's just going to happen the way it happens. Like, wow, man, I need to just make sure nothing interferes with this chemical equation. It's just, it's like a chemical reaction or something. When you put those people in the same room, a thing happens. So as long as we just keep putting them in the same room, that thing will keep happening.
Nice. And before we wrap up here, you mentioned at the very beginning that sit-down servants is what's taken up a lot of your time most recently. Mm-hmm. What's going on there?
I've been doing a lot of playing. I play, a couple nights a week down here in Austin, and just taking a really casual approach to if I'm playing for 2.5 hours on any given night, it builds your repertoire exceptionally. And sit-down servants started out being I was playing guitar and bass pedals, and it was more sort of one-chord stomp blues in a way. Mm-hmm. But since I started playing more steel guitar, now I'm playing a triple neck console steel with 3 8-string necks and in different tunings with the bass pedals, and dipping into a repertoire of jazz material that I haven't thought of in 25 years. Because I was a jazz musician back in the day. Big Sugar started out backing up jazz singers. We were Molly Johnson's backup band for years. So I'll go from playing, a Lee Scratch Perry song to an Earth, Wind and Fire song to a Duke Ellington medley, some Mahalia Jackson, whatever, just stuff that's not really in the steel guitar repertoire. It's in my repertoire, so it's just all bets are off. We'll go from Pink Floyd to Bob Marley and back again. So
cool, man.
That's just for fun, but it's strange when your guard is down and you're just doing stuff for fun locally. Like Joe Satriani has become a big fan of our thing, and taking us. We did a cross Canada tour with him last fall. Now he's taking us over to Europe with him. We're doing some dates in the Northeast U.S. with them. I mean, the phone just keeps ringing and people going, "Hey, do you think you want to do sit-down servant with us?" Like, yeah, I would. I would. Who thought that? Who would have ever thought that was going to be the thing that would get me this busy? But it's a nice problem to have, just having to thread the needle between a really busy Big Sugar, a busy sit-down servant. Grady's got some new stuff coming out we're working on, Wide Mouth Mason. We haven't done a new record in a couple of years, but that's starting to get time for us to put our heads together on that. Hey, man, this is what I do, man.
Nice, man. And Big Sugar's heading out on the road in Europe shortly, I think the end of this month.
Yeah.
But anything coming up as far as Canadian dates?
Once Yardstyle hits the street, then the Yardstyle, the Big Sugar Yardies will be out on tour and working that pretty hard. Right. So you'll be seeing the Yardstyle crew out on tour here pretty soon.
Man, I'm looking forward to seeing that. And when does Yardstyle drop again in North America?
What's the street date for Yardstyle, man? April 15th.
April 15th. All right. So Yardstyle comes out April 15th. But man, I've kept you here a while. It is real true pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for making this time for me.
Yeah, it was a nice one, man. Thank you very much.
No worries, man. Best of luck at the shows coming up in Europe. Know the album will be a success. And once again, April 15th was it? Yardstyle's coming out.
Yeah.
Latest from Big Sugar. Again, man, thank you. And I'll talk to you again hopefully soon and catch you guys on the road.
Right on, man. Pleasure.
Cheers.
Thanks, Mike.
No worries, man.
Bye-bye.